Snowflakes melted on Eliza Washaki's face as she crouched behind a stack of crates near the back wall of the Silver Raven Saloon, her fingers dug into the icy dirt. Her breath came shallow, each exhale blooming white in the frozen air. The alley was narrow, shadowed, and smelled of old whiskey garbage and something far more hopeless. The thin soles of her boots had soaked through hours ago. She'd stopped feeling her toes sometime before dusk. Now it was full dark Christmas Eve and the world didn't care that she was dying in it. She pulled her worn wool shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did nothing to stop the tremors shaking her bones. She hadn't eaten since Tuesday, hadn't slept since Wednesday. And sometime between the last rejection and the first snowfall, she stopped hoping anyone would see her as anything but a problem to move along or a body to use. She should have never left St. Louis. Should have never believed that a contract and a letter meant safety. A laugh cracked the silence at the far end of the alley, two men's voices slurred and mean. She didn't lift her head, didn't move. Maybe they'd walk past. Maybe they'd think she was already gone. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it was trying to escape first. Boots scuffed gravel. One voice said, "Told you she'd be here." Like a stray dog that don't know when it's been turned out. The other let out a low chuckle. "She's still breathing. That's all you said I needed." Eliza blinked slowly, lifting her head, the world spinning at the edges of her vision. Two shapes approached, one tall, lean, swaying with drink. The other heavier with a sharp coat and sharper eyes. Miss Washaki, the sharper one, said mock cheer in his voice. "You've certainly made it difficult to track you down." "Mr. Bigby." Her voice cracked like thin ice. She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. She managed to push herself halfway up the wall, breath hitching. "What do you want?" Conrad Bigby smiled, his teeth a little too perfect. "Oh, come now. You know what I want. Mr. Phelps here has graciously offered to honor your agreement. Considering Silas backed out, we thought we'd give you another chance to fulfill your contract." Eliza's gaze darted to the other man, Roy Phelps. His eyes were glassy, his mouth slack, but there was hunger behind his smile. "I didn't agree to anything with him," she said, voice steadier now, despite the storm inside her. "The contract was with Silas. He refused. That should be the end of it." Bigby pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, waving it like a flag. "The contract says you agreed to marry upon arrival. It doesn't name names. Mr. Phelps has paid your debt to the agency. He's owed a bride. I'm not for sale." Her fingers dug into the stone wall behind her. "You can't force me." Force? Bigby laughed. "No one's forcing you. You're free to decline. Course you'll be in violation. That's a $42 debt, plus travel costs. We can take that up with the judge, but I'm sure you'd rather avoid jail over the holidays." Roy took a step forward, reaching for her arm. "Come on now, girl. You'll get food a roof. Better than freezing out here, ain't it?" She slapped his hand away. The air changed. Bigby's smile vanished. "You'd rather rot in this alley. You think anyone's coming to rescue you? No one here gives a damn. They've all seen you beg for scraps. You've got no money, no place, no one." He wasn't wrong. Eliza felt her legs shake. The frost had crept into her spine. And then the soft jingle of harness chains. The low groan of a wagon wheel turning into the alley. A shadow passed over the crates, and a man's voice, low, even, and carved from stone, broke through the bitter air. She said no. I heard it plain. "That means you're done here." Three heads turned toward the end of the alley. A wagon sat broad and sturdy, two horses pawing at the packed snow. A man stepped down from the seat. Tall, broad-shouldered face shadowed by a wide hat. He moved with the ease of someone used to physical work, the kind that came from building and mending, not tearing down. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, just stood there like the mountain behind him. "This doesn't concern you," Bigby snapped. The man didn't blink. "Does now. She's under contract," Roy added, puffing his chest. "She's not property." The man walked forward, slow but certain. "And she's clearly not interested. So you got two choices: walk away, or I carry you." Bigby's face darkened. "This is unlawful interference." The man reached Eliza and bent to pick up her bag, gently gathering the spilled contents back into it: a worn Bible, a cracked comb, 2 dresses. He straightened, looked her in the eye, and extended his hand. "You got somewhere else to go." Her throat tightened. She shook her head. "Then you do now." His voice softened. "Name's Daniel Red Elk. My ranch is north of here. You're coming with me." She stared at him. His face was weathered, not cruel. His hand was steady, not grabbing. She wanted to believe God. She wanted to believe he was real. Her fingers slid into his. He lifted her with ease. Bigby spat into the dirt. "She'll regret this." Daniel didn't look back. "Send me the bill." With Eliza at his side and her carpet bag in his other hand, he walked her past the 2 men, helped her onto the wagon bed. 4 children, wide-eyed and silent, shifted to make room. The youngest, a girl no older than 6, offered Eliza her blanket without a word. As the wagon turned onto the street and left the alley behind, Eliza watched the saloon lights fade. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from the flood of something unfamiliar. Relief. She didn't know who this Daniel Red Elk was or why he'd helped. She didn't know what waited at his ranch or what would be expected of her. But for the first time in 3 days, someone had seen her. And in the quiet rattle of wheels on snow, Eliza Washaki dared to believe she might live long enough to matter again. The snow deepened as the wagon rumbled out of town wheels, creaking beneath the weight of the storm and the silence in the bed. Eliza sat stiffly between the stack of blankets and the bundled children, the girl who had offered her the cover now asleep against her shoulder. Daniel Red Elk hadn't said much after they left the alley, and Eliza didn't know if that silence was mercy or caution. The warmth of the girl against her side was the only thing anchoring her to the moment, her fingers still tingling from where they had laced with his. Her eyes drifted to the boy sitting directly across from her. 13, maybe. Taller than the others, dark hair tucked under a fur-lined cap. He watched her with a mix of suspicion and something colder, protection sharpened into suspicion. The twins seated between him and Daniel were dozing, heads tilted toward each other, soft breaths clouding the air. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. "You all right, "Yes," she said, though it wasn't true. Her limbs still ached from the cold. Her heart was somewhere between her throat and her stomach. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." His tone was flat, not unkind. "No one should have been left like that. That's all. I don't understand why you stopped, why you helped me." Daniel's eyes flicked to hers, then back to the trail. "Because it was the right thing. That should be enough." The wagon turned off the main road and followed a narrow trail lined with bare cottonwoods. In the distance, she could see warm light flickering through the snow windows, glowing orange through the thick blue dusk. "You have a family," she said softly. 4 children. Why would you bring a stranger into your home?" His hands tightened slightly on the reins, but his voice remained level. "They've had strangers in their lives before. This one ain't a danger. Just needs a place to breathe again." Eliza swallowed hard. A place to breathe again. She wasn't sure when she had last done that without fear crawling under her ribs. The boy across from her finally spoke. "What's your name, Eliza?" she answered. "Eliza Washaki." His eyes narrowed just a touch. You Shoshone. My father was. My mother was French Creole. He nodded once, but didn't offer his name in return. Daniel slowed the horses as the house came into view, a sturdy log structure nestled beside a corral, lanterns glowing in every window. Smoke curled up from the chimney, and warmth seemed to radiate from the very earth around it. Eliza, Daniel said quietly, "This place ain't charity. You're welcome as long as you need. You help out where you can. You rest when you must. That's all I ask." She stared at the flickering light, the promise of dry clothes and a roof, and something lodged in her throat. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't." He guided the wagon to a stop. "Just get warm." He lifted the sleeping girl from Eliza's shoulder, his daughter, she realized now, and carried her inside. Eliza followed, boots crunching over the snow-packed earth carpet bag clutched to her chest. The moment she crossed the threshold, heat wrapped around her like a miracle. A fire crackled in a large stone hearth. Quilts draped over every chair. The scent of cooked beans and bread lingered in the air like a memory. Daniel nodded toward the hallway. "Spare rooms at the end. Might be cold, but there's wood stacked beside the stove." She looked around, eyes brimming. This is too much. It's a start." He set his daughter on a cot by the fire, covering her gently. "We've all needed one." The boy hovered near the hearth, still watching Eliza. She turned to him. "You didn't tell me your name?" He hesitated. "Toma." "Thank you, Toma, for not saying no when your father brought me here. I didn't say yes either." Toma, Daniel warned, not harsh, but firm. Eliza didn't flinch. She nodded. "That's fair." Daniel motioned toward the hallway. "Go on, rest." Eliza moved toward the room, but paused at the doorway. "Why did you really help me, Daniel?" He looked at her shadows flickering across his face from the firelight. Then he said, not unkindly, "Because no one ever helped my wife. And I still live with what came of that." Eliza stood still, the words heavy in the warm air. She understood more in that sentence than in any contract, any sermon, or any promise she'd ever heard. Guilt, grief, and redemption all braided together like a cord too strong to snap. She walked to the room, dropped her bag beside the bed, and stood for a long time staring out the frost-lined window. Snow still fell. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled once. And for the first time in days, she wasn't afraid to sleep. The first morning came heavy with silence. Snow had blanketed the hills, thick overnight, muffling every sound, but Eliza's ears still rang with memories of cold alley stones and children's shallow breaths. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before the sun crested the pines, unsure if she had the right to move freely through someone else's home. Her boots were still damp from the night before, but she pulled them on anyway and stepped into the hallway, her fingers brushing the log walls like they might vanish. Down the corridor, the warmth of the kitchen reached out to her, first wood smoke frying bacon and fresh coffee. Daniel stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, stirring a pan with one hand while the other adjusted a kettle. He glanced up but didn't speak right away. His silence wasn't cruel. It was steady, like a man used to, mornings beginning with work, not words. "You can sit," he said finally, nodding to the bench by the hearth. Eliza moved slowly, watching the rhythm of his movements. There was no hesitation in him. Everything he did had purpose, controlled, measured. A man who'd built his days around duty and survival. He slid a plate of cornbread and eggs onto the table. "I wasn't sure I should come out," she murmured. "You're not locked in that room," he replied without turning. "This is a house, not a cell." She looked around, eyes trailing over the neat rows of canning jars, the polished rifle over the mantel, the worn family quilt tossed over the rocking chair. It's hard to trust kindness when you've been running from cruelty for so long. Daniel poured her a cup of coffee. Then let the first cup of it remind you what it feels like to stop running. He sat across from her, watching her over the rim of his mug. How long were you out there? Eliza hesitated. 4 nights, maybe 5. I lost track after the second day, with no coat, no food. She nodded. The coat was taken in Colorado. The rest I traded away before reaching Wyoming. Daniel's jaw tightened. You came a long way just to vanish in a snowdrift. I didn't mean to vanish. Her voice caught. I meant to start over. From the hallway came the sound of feet padding across wooden floors. Toma appeared first, his dark eyes still guarded. Then the 2 twins, Josie and Samson, wide-eyed and curious. Last was Maribel, rubbing sleep from her eyes and holding a threadbare doll by one arm. Eliza watched them silently, then leaned toward Daniel. I should earn this, whatever this is. You'll get your chance, he said, his tone level. There's always work needing done. I don't mean chores, I mean trust. I want to give you reason to believe I'm worth it. Daniel met her gaze, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. 2 people worn down by life, each carrying their own ledger of debts, griefs, and unspoken truths. Then he simply said, then stay. Learn the rhythms here. The day unfolded in layers, slow, deliberate. Daniel showed her the barn, the smokehouse, the woodpile that needed restocking. Eliza pulled her weight without complaint, her body aching but grateful for the movement, for purpose. Toma trailed behind them most of the day, never far, but never close, like a shadow, unsure of where to settle. Late that afternoon, after the chores were done and the children napping, Daniel took her up the ridge behind the house. The snow had stilled by then, but a sharp wind pulled at her coat as they climbed. When they reached the top, the valley spread out below like something painted: white hills, black pines, a frozen creek threading through it all. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, eyes on the horizon. My wife Clara used to say the mountains listened. That up here God paid closer attention. Eliza stared at him, surprised. Is she buried up here? Daniel nodded. On the west slope. She's the reason this place even exists. Everything we built. We built together. I'm sorry, she said gently. He nodded once, not needing pity, just recognition. The land changed after she passed. Still beautiful, but quieter, like it's holding its breath. They stood in silence for a while, the wind wrapping around them. Finally, he said, I brought you up here so you'd understand something. This isn't a halfway stop. If you want to rest, I'll make room. If you want to run, I won't stop you. But if you want to stay, it means something. This land's not just mine. It was hers. And now it's part of our children's bones. I don't take that lightly, Eliza whispered. I know what it means to belong nowhere, and what it means to hope for a corner to claim. Daniel turned to her, his expression unreadable. Then he said the words that stayed with her long after the wind had quieted. It ain't just about surviving, Eliza. It's about becoming someone again, even after the world tried to break you. The walk down the ridge was silent. When they returned, Maribel ran to them, her little arms flung wide as she shouted Eliza's name like it had been hers to say all along. Eliza knelt, wrapping the child in a tight embrace that brought an unexpected sting to her eyes. And in that moment something shifted. Not fully, not yet. But the seed of something had taken root, a beginning fragile but real. From the tree line, Toma watched. Not close, not far. And his expression for the first time wasn't entirely mistrusting. It was waiting, testing, as if he too was deciding whether she would stay. A week passed before Eliza touched the piano. It stood against the parlor wall like a relic from another life. Its mahogany frame, worn but noble, the ivory keys dulled to a buttery cream. Every morning she dusted around it, her eyes lingering just a second longer than the day before. Daniel never said a word about it. Neither did the children, though Maribel once ran her hand along the edge and whispered, "Mama used to sing here." That morning, snow drifted outside in lazy curls soft as ash. Inside the house was warm and still. Daniel had taken Toma to mend a fence post blown down in the wind. Josie and Samson were busy with a pile of kindling and blocks. Maribel sat by the fire with her doll humming softly to herself. Eliza paused in the doorway, cloth in hand, gaze fixed on the piano. Her heart beat a little faster, like it always did, when memories crept in uninvited. She hadn't touched one since New Orleans, since before the sickness and the ruin and the loss. She crossed the room slowly and sat. The bench creaked beneath her weight. She hesitated, her fingers hovering just above the keys. "Your mama sang here?" she asked, without turning. Maribel looked up and nodded. "Daddy said she used to play lullabies." Eliza's voice was hushed. "Do you remember them?" The little girl shook her head. "No. But I remember how her singing made everything quiet inside." Eliza pressed a single key, "Ah, si," then another. The sound was slightly out of tune, but still true. She played a scale, slow and trembling, then slipped into a melody soft and familiar. Something old, something French passed from her mother's tongue to her own hands. Her breath caught, but she didn't stop. Josie peeked around the corner. Samson followed, clutching a blanket. They edged closer, drawn like moths to flame. Maribel crawled toward the piano bench, eyes wide. The song shifted. Eliza's fingers warmed to the task, weaving memory into sound. For a few minutes, the house breathed with the music. A hush fell over the room like prayer. Her posture straightened. Her body remembered this motion, this grace. It felt like reclaiming a part of herself that had been left for dead in the alley. When the final note faded, Maribel clapped quietly, a shy grin on her face. "That was pretty," she whispered. "Thank you," Eliza said softly. From behind her, a deep voice added, "She used to play that same tune." Eliza turned to see Daniel standing in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders. Toma beside him, both silent. Daniel's eyes weren't on her hands. They were on her face, watching something he recognized. "She played it differently," he said. "Softer. Slower. She had gentler hands, I imagine," Eliza replied, lips trembling with the trace of a smile. Daniel stepped forward and nodded toward the piano. "You're welcome to play whenever you like." She stood slowly. "I wasn't sure if I should. I didn't want to disturb anything sacred." "It's not sacred anymore," he said quietly. "It's just quiet." That night, Eliza lit the lanterns early. The warmth of the fire and the scent of venison stew drifted through the house. Toma brought in more logs without being asked. Maribel nestled into Eliza's side as if it had always been hers. After supper, while the children dozed, Eliza asked Daniel if he had more reading lamps. She wanted to sew, there were clothes to mend, and the work kept her thoughts from wandering too far into the past. He fetched one from the storage chest and set it beside her on the end table. As he did, his hand brushed hers, and neither of them pulled away right away. "You have a way of filling the empty spaces," he said, voice low. "I just do what I know," she replied. "And what is it you know?" Eliza paused, thread in her hand. "I know how to survive. I know how to listen. And I know that kindness like yours doesn't come without scars." He studied her face. "You think I'm kind? I think you're doing more for me than I ever earned." Daniel turned to the fire, watching the flames dance along the logs. "Sometimes we don't get what we earned. We just get what's next." Before she could reply, a loud knock rattled the front door. It wasn't the wind this time. It was sharp, purposeful. Daniel stood. Toma, already halfway to his feet, moved to the corner near the rifle. Daniel opened the door, revealing a tall man wrapped in a thick coat, wide-brimmed hat, crusted with ice. A gold badge gleamed under the porch light. "Evening," the man said. "I'm Sheriff Collins from Rock Ridge." Daniel didn't move. "What brings you here this far out?" The sheriff looked past him, eyes scanning the room. They landed on Eliza. "I'm looking for a woman," he said. "Name's Eliza Washakie. We've had questions about her involvement in a robbery near Cheyenne. She went missing right around the same time." The room froze. Eliza stood slowly, her hands still holding the patchwork cloth. Her face drained of color, but her voice didn't tremble. "I didn't rob anyone." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we talk inside?" Daniel didn't open the door wider. "I mind very much. She's under my roof." "You got a warrant?" "No warrant. Just a few questions. I'll be back tomorrow." He tipped his hat, cast one last look toward Eliza, then turned and walked into the darkness. Daniel shut the door slowly, his hand still on the knob. No one spoke. Even the fire had gone still. Eliza looked at him, her voice barely a breath. "I didn't do what he said. I swear it." Daniel's eyes never left hers. "Then you'll tell me everything, starting now." Outside, the snow began falling harder, covering the sheriff's tracks before they could freeze. Inside, the warmth felt thinner, like a trust tested by wind. The silence after the sheriff's departure was thick, stretching across the walls like smoke. Eliza stood rooted by the hearth, the quilt still clutched in her hands. Her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The children had been ushered quietly to the back room by Toma, who'd given her one last hard glance before closing the door. Daniel remained near the door, hands still resting on the knob, as though he could keep the whole world out by holding it shut. "You said you didn't do it." He finally said, his voice low but steady. "Then tell me what happened." Eliza sat down slowly on the edge of the chair. Her palms were damp. Her mouth was dry. She looked up at him, not the man who'd pulled her from the snow, but the one who deserved the truth. "I didn't run because I was guilty. I ran because the man I trusted turned on me, and the law didn't care to listen." Daniel pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Start from the beginning." She took a deep breath. "My husband, Charles Washakie, was part Shoshone like me. Grew up near Fort Hall. We met in Idaho and moved to Cheyenne when he took a job with a trader's caravan. At first it was good, quiet, honest work. I cooked, helped with ledgers, sewed saddlebags. The men respected me." Her fingers twisted the fabric in her lap. "But then Charles started staying out late. He'd come home with whiskey on his breath, dust on his boots from places I didn't ask about. I should have known something was wrong. But I kept thinking he'd come back to himself." She looked at the fire, its light flickering like memories she couldn't douse. "One night he came home with a new coat. Fur-lined. Clean. I knew we didn't have money for it. I asked, and he said he'd won it off a traveler. The next day, word spread a mercantile wagon was robbed on the northern pass. The description of the stolen goods matches what he brought home." Daniel's brows drew together. "You confronted him?" "I did. He swore up and down it wasn't him. But I found the rest of the stolen goods in our root cellar blankets, tins, a pearl-handled revolver still in its case." She paused, her voice fraying. "I told him I was going to the sheriff. I couldn't live like that under a roof bought with other folks' loss. He hit me, said if I went to the law he'd tell them I was part of it, that I'd helped plan it. He even had one of his friends, a man named Garth Baird, sign a statement saying he'd seen me trade goods on the roadside. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, listening without judgment. So I ran. I packed what I could, tried to go east, but the stage was ambushed near Rawlins. That's where I lost everything. By the time I got to Riverton, I was just another woman with no shoes, no money, and no name anyone believed. Her eyes were glassy, but her voice held. I never took anything from anyone, Daniel. I just didn't know how to fight a lie built by a man who used to call me his wife. Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of her story settling into the room like dust. And the sheriff, he asked. I don't know if he's chasing justice or chasing a bounty. Either way, he'll be back. They sat in silence, the only sound the hiss of the hearth and the wind brushing against the window panes. You said your husband's name was Washakie, Daniel said at last. You took his name, I did. But my given name was Eliza Redbird. Daniel froze his head, turning slowly. Redbird. My father was Joseph Redbird. He taught language at Wind River Agency before he passed. Why, Daniel stood rubbing his hand over his face. I knew Joseph. We were boys together at the agency school. He used to carve animals from wood, leave them on the steps of the chapel. A faint smile ghosted her lips. He made me a sparrow once. Said I had a voice too big for my body. Daniel looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. History, blood, memory, things deeper than coincidence. You should have told me, he said softly. I didn't think I had the right to carry that name anymore. Your father was one of the strongest men I ever knew. You carry more than a name, Eliza. You carry his spine. From the hallway came a soft knock. Toma stood in the doorway watching them both. I heard, he said. Most of it. Eliza stood bracing for whatever accusation would come, but Toma didn't accuse. He looked at Daniel. She stays right, Daniel didn't hesitate. She stays. Toma nodded once, then disappeared back into the dark. Eliza exhaled shakily. Thank you. I don't do this because I pity you, Daniel said. I do it because I believe you. She looked up, surprised. Why? Because my own father told lies about my mother that nearly got her hanged. I know the sound of truth when it's trying to crawl out from under shame. That night, Eliza didn't sleep. She watched the flames from her bed, her hands pressed together like prayer. In the early hours, she rose, wrapped herself in a shawl, and walked quietly through the house. Past the children's rooms, past the stove, out to the porch where the night air bit deep. She stood beneath the stars, feeling the cold trace her collarbone. The moon hung low. The land beyond the cabin stretched white and still. Behind her, Daniel appeared without a word, a blanket in his arms. He draped it around her shoulders and stood beside her. I was thinking, he said quietly. If the sheriff comes back with trouble, we'll be ready. She turned to him, searching his face. You'd do that. For me, Daniel didn't flinch. For you. For the truth. And for the people my children are learning to become. In the far-off distance, a lone coyote cried into the silence. Eliza closed her eyes. This time she didn't feel alone in the sound. The law might come with papers, but I've got something stronger, land memory, and a town that remembers who I am. Let them try. Morning light poured over the edge of the horizon like honey over frost, gilding the winter landscape in soft gold. The cabin stirred with life wood, creaking water, boiling boots scraping the floorboards. Eliza braided Nettie's hair in silence, her fingers gentle movements. Sure. The little girl leaned against her, still sleepy-eyed, and whispered, "Papa said I can ride to town today. Are you coming too?" Eliza hesitated. Her heart had not rested easy since the sheriff's visit. But there were groceries to fetch and supplies to trade. More than that, there were whispers in town that needed facing. If she stayed hidden too long, shadows would shape her story. She would not let that happen. "I'll come," she said, tying off the braid. "Let's be quick." By the time they set off, the wagon was loaded light, and Daniel's face was tight with thought. Toma rode ahead on horseback, always scanning the road, his quiet presence a comfort and a shield. Nettie bounced between them, cheeks red with the cold scarf, fluttering like a flag of innocence. Riverton was slow to wake that morning, but even from a distance, Eliza felt eyes on her. As they pulled in by the general store, conversation seemed to quiet around them. People glanced, whispered, then looked away. Inside the store was warmer, but no more welcoming. Mrs. Fuller, the shopkeeper's wife, greeted Daniel with a polite nod, then gave Eliza the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't expect you back in town so soon," she said, voice coated in syrup but edged like a knife. Daniel stepped in before Eliza could answer. "We've got supplies to pick up, same as always." Mrs. Fuller's gaze darted toward Eliza. "Of course. Just folks are talking is all." Daniel's jaw clenched. Folks been wrong before. Eliza didn't flinch. Instead, she walked to the bins of flour and beans, started measuring what they needed. Her hands were steady, her eyes forward. Behind her, murmurs grew like weeds, soft but relentless. She could almost hear the shape of her name twisting through them like smoke. She was nearly done when the door slammed open. Franklin Poe strode in his deputy star pinned crooked on his chest, a rolled paper in his hand. He was a younger man, cocky with slick hair and a mustache that twitched when he smiled. "Eliza Washakie," he called loud enough for the entire store to freeze. Daniel stepped forward immediately. "Deputy, you're in the wrong place to make noise." Franklin ignored him, holding up the paper like a holy writ. "Warrant issued out of Cheyenne. Signed yesterday. We're taking her in." Eliza stood tall, shoulders squared, though her stomach churned. She didn't run this time. She didn't beg. She simply said, "I am not Washakie anymore." "You can tell that to the judge," Franklin said, stepping toward her. Daniel moved faster. He planted himself between them, towering immovable. "This land's not Cheyenne. You'll come through Wind River land, and that means tribal courts got a say. You serve her here, you serve the tribe first, and you serve me." Franklin hesitated, thrown. "It's a state warrant, not tribal business." Daniel's voice dropped low and hard. "She's Redbird by blood. That makes it tribal business." Toma came in through the back, rifle casually in hand. His silence was louder than anything Franklin could have said. The deputy looked around the store. Folks had stopped pretending to browse. Several of them people Daniel had hauled fence with hunted elk alongside were watching. Franklin lowered the paper slightly. "We'll be back. With more than paper." Daniel didn't blink. "You bring paper, I'll bring history." Franklin backed out, muttering something under his breath. The door shut with a gust. Silence fell again, but this time it was different. Old Mr. Reese, who'd watched it all from behind a barrel of oats, tipped his hat. "Joseph Redbird taught my boy to read. Always said justice had to ride slow but true. Looks like his daughter's got the same steel." Others nodded. Some still looked away. But the tide had turned, just a little. Back at the wagon, Daniel helped Eliza up, his hand lingering in hers. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "But I'm not afraid either." He nodded. "Good." because that was only the first warning shot. As they rolled back toward the ranch, Toma rode close behind Eyes, scanning the trees, shoulders stiff. The message was clear: this wasn't over. At home, the children met them at the gate, unaware of what had nearly changed the shape of everything. Eliza climbed down, brushing dust from her skirt. She looked up at the sky, clear, wide, relentless. If they wanted to come again, let them. This time she wouldn't be running. She'd be standing in her father's name, her own name, and the truth she no longer had to hide. He can send every lawman from Cheyenne, but I won't trade my name for silence, not now, not ever. The kitchen was quiet that evening, a low simmer of tension hanging just above the surface like steam rising from the pot of rabbit stew. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, staring out the window as dusk claimed the snowy fields. Toma sat at the table, oiling his rifle, his movements meticulous and silent. Eliza stood by the stove, ladling broth into bowls, but her mind was nowhere near the hearth. It spun coiled with the image of Franklin Poe's smug smile and the weight of the warrant he held. Even with Daniel's firm stance and Toma's calm threat, she knew the fight hadn't ended in the general store. It had only just begun. The children were upstairs, their muffled laughter floating down through the floorboards. Their innocence was a fragile glass dome, and she feared how easily it could shatter. She set a bowl in front of Toma. "You think he'll come back soon?" Toma glanced up. "Soon, yes, but not alone." Daniel pushed away from the window and joined them. "We need to be ready." Eliza nodded. "Then let's stop pretending this is temporary." Toma raised an eyebrow. "I mean it," she said. "I've been holding my breath like I'll wake up and be forced back to that alley, to that freight station, to that nightmare. But I'm not that woman anymore. This land, this house, I choose it. I choose to stay. And if they come for me again, they'll have to deal with more than just a girl off the train." Daniel held her gaze for a long moment. "Good. Because I'm tired of planning around fear." Toma chuckled low. "About time someone said it." Daniel turned to him. "Will you ride to Wind River? We need tribal council support before any judge from Cheyenne tries to override it." "I'll leave before sunup," Toma said, nodding. The three of them shared a quiet look, one laced with shared purpose. Then Daniel added, "We'll need another voice, too. Sheriff Nolan." Eliza blinked. "I thought he's not a bad man," Daniel said. "Just tied to too many people who pretend justice is neat." She hesitated but nodded. "Then we talked to him. Together." The next morning the sky cracked open with sun so bright it felt like defiance. Eliza rode beside Daniel into Riverton again, this time not hiding under scarves or shadows. She wore her coat open, her chin lifted, her braids long and proud. Daniel's presence at her side was a shield, but she no longer leaned on it out of weakness, only trust. They found Sheriff Nolan at his office, seated behind a desk scarred with years of boots and ledgers. He looked up, and his expression shifted when he saw who entered. "Eliza," he said, rising. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." She stepped forward before Daniel could speak. "You saw the warrant? But you also saw Poe's face. This isn't about justice, it's about silence, about buying women and calling it a contract." Nolan sighed, rubbing his temple. "I don't make the laws, Eliza. I just keep the peace." "Then do that," she said, her voice unwavering. "Because if they drag me to Cheyenne, they'll drag half this town's conscience with me. You want to keep the peace, stand between me and men like Poe." Daniel added, "She's got tribal protection, Redbird blood. That makes it a jurisdictional question." Nolan looked between them, chewing on the inside of his cheek. "Redbird, huh? That name still holds weight." "It should," Daniel said. "It's her right." Finally, Nolan nodded. I'll stall 'em. No arrests on Riverton soil unless there's a clear handoff from tribal court. But you know they'll try other ways. We're ready, Eliza said. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle flakes that didn't know the weight of names or the pressure of law. But Eliza did, and she wore hers like armor. Back at the ranch, Toma had returned with word that the tribal council was willing to intervene if Eliza formally requested it. That meant standing before elders, telling her full story, not just the parts that hurt less. Eliza stood on the porch that evening, fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. I have to do it, she said to Daniel. He nodded. You don't owe anyone your pain, Eliza. But I owe it to every girl who stepped off a train and was handed a cage. I owe it to the woman I used to be, and I owe it to myself. You won't be alone, he said. 2 days later, they rode south deeper into Wind River territory. The lodge was quiet, warm with the scent of cedar and sage. Elders lined the walls, men and women whose eyes held stories longer than any document. Eliza stood in the center, heart pounding but posture strong. She told them everything. From the moment she signed her name under duress, from the cold train seat to the alley behind the freight yard, from the stench of Poe's trap to the salvation that came not with angels, but with a man named Daniel and a daughter named Nettie. She didn't cry. Her voice shook once, but she held. When she finished, silence hung in the room like smoke. One of the elders, an older woman with silver hair and eyes like wet stone, leaned forward. You carry the Redbird name, and you carry the Redbird fire. We'll honor both. It was done. On the ride home, Eliza felt lighter, not because the danger had passed, but because the truth had found air. She would not be hidden. She would not be buried under contracts or shame. Back at the ranch, the children ran to meet them. Daniel helped her down, his eyes searching hers. You sure you're all right? I'm sure, she said, looking past him to the wide Wyoming sky. Let them come. I've got my name and I've got a voice. And this time I'm not giving either away. I didn't run to be safe, I ran to be free. And I'm not running anymore. The frost clung to the windows like lace as dawn crept into the sky, cold and pale. Eliza stood by the hearth, stirring a pot of cornmeal mush while the cabin slowly warmed. The scent of ash and coffee drifted through the house, mingling with the muffled giggles of Nettie and Eli playing with carved animals in the corner. She hadn't slept much, not since returning from Wind River. The council's decision had lifted one weight off her shoulders, but it had only cleared the path for a harder truth. She was no longer a fleeing woman hiding behind borrowed names and uncertain kindness. She had chosen to stay, which meant she had to act like she belonged. Daniel stepped in from the barn, snow clinging to his boots and shoulders. He shook it off, set his gloves on the peg, and leaned against the doorframe. They're coming, he said. Eliza turned to him slowly. Who, a coach from Cheyenne? 2 men not local. They were seen outside Nolan's office last night, her hands stilled on the ladle. The quiet clatter of Nettie's play faded into her mind like a far-off echo. I thought the tribal ruling would slow them down. It did, Daniel replied. But it didn't stop them. They're not here for a trial. They're here to make you disappear quietly. Eliza's eyes dropped to the floorboards. For a second, her heart beat like it used to, fast and terrified. But she drew a breath and forced herself to look up. I'm not hiding again. Daniel moved closer. No one's asking you to. She reached over and squeezed his hand once, quick and firm. Then let's make it clear they can't buy silence from this house. By midday, word had spread across Riverton. Franklin Poe's reach was long, but the town had seen Eliza. They'd seen the way she walked now, the way she spoke her name without shame. And it stirred something in them, something that went deeper than fear. At the general store, Ruth Miller stood behind the counter with a rifle leaning just below the till. "They think they can roll in here and scare people," she muttered to Toma as he loaded salt into a burlap sack. "But folks remember what it was like before the railroad. We didn't survive drought and wolves just to bend a knee to fancy boots." Toma chuckled. "No one doubts you, Miss Ruth." Back at the ranch, Eliza opened the cedar chest Daniel had carved for her. Inside, wrapped in wool, lay the marriage contract signed by Poe and pressed with a wax seal. It felt like holding her own chains. She carried it out to the front yard, where the wind danced through the dry prairie grass. The fire pit was cold, but she built a flame, slowly feeding it with kindling and old fence slats. Then with both hands, she dropped the document into the heart of the fire. The parchment curled, blackened, and disintegrated. Daniel joined her, standing shoulder to shoulder. "You sure that was wise?" he asked softly. "It was necessary," she said. "Let them come asking for proof. I'll give them my voice. That's the only thing that belongs to me." The next morning the coach did come. Dark wood, polished brass. Too fine for country roads, but it rolled into town like it owned the land. Two men stepped out, one tall and broad with a black coat flaring in the wind, the other wiry and pale with a thin ledger tucked under his arm. They asked questions. They flashed documents. But no one had seen Eliza that day, because Eliza had ridden south to the river with Toma and Daniel to a clearing where the tribe held open meetings. There she would speak again, this time not for protection but for precedent. "I want it on record," she told the elders, her voice steady, her words crisp as the morning air, "that no woman traded like cattle shall be forced back under contract once her consent is revoked. That no paper, however stamped, can override the will of a living soul." One of the elders, Gray Elk, nodded solemnly. "Then let this be law under our eye, and let it burn bright enough that the wind carries word to Cheyenne." That night, back at the ranch, Eliza tucked Nettie and Eli into bed. The little girl yawned and whispered, "Mama, are the bad men gone?" Eliza kissed her forehead and whispered, "They're leaving, and we're staying." In the hallway, Daniel waited. When she stepped out, he offered her a cup of tea. "You did it," he said. "We're doing it," she corrected. Outside, the wind howled across the land like a warning and a promise. Eliza stood at the door, watching the stars blaze above snow-covered hills. She wasn't afraid of the road anymore. She was building one. One paved with truth, grit, and a name that no man would ever take from her again. They thought silence was safety, but it was truth that set the fire burning through the whole valley. Kaitsetutas. Snow blanketed the hills like the hush before a prayer. But inside the ranch house, the air was thick with urgency. Eliza stood at the window, staring toward the rising column of dust along the trail that led east. Men from the territorial office were returning after receiving word of the tribal council's decision. But they weren't alone. A letter had arrived that morning, slid under the door without a name or seal. It was scrawled in a precise, educated hand. "Your speech has riled more than dust. Retract your statements or prepare to be publicly tried for fraud, slander, and desertion. Your children will not be spared embarrassment." Eliza's fingers had trembled holding the page, not out of fear for herself, but for Nettie, for Eli, for the house she and Daniel had built out of stubborn hope. Her first instinct had been to burn it, but Daniel stopped her. "This isn't just a threat," he said, voice grim. "It's a test." "We've already stood before council," she replied. "What more do they want?" "They want you to bow, and if you don't, they'll aim to make an example of you." Toma paced near the hearth, arms crossed, a deep crease between his brows. "They don't understand this place. They think they can turn us with paper and pressure. They don't need understanding, Daniel said. They need fear. But Eliza wasn't made of the same silence that once kept her caged. She turned toward both men, her voice steady. Then we make them understand truth is louder than threats. By afternoon, word had spread. Eliza had sent word to the Wind River Ledger, the small but respected press run out of the tribal college, and requested an interview, public printed, permanent. It was a bold step, one that Daniel hesitated to support at first. If they think you're trying to stir public opinion, they'll hit harder, he warned. I'm not stirring, she answered. I'm standing still for once in my life. That night, the reporter, a young woman named Marin Two Feathers, arrived with a notebook and a calm, curious expression. She didn't ask questions right away. She watched Eliza serve stew to the children, saw the way Eli clung to Daniel's side, how Nettie hummed, while braiding scraps of fabric for a doll. Then Marin finally said, "Most people would have run." Eliza smiled faintly. "I did once. But it turns out when you run long enough, you either lose yourself or find something worth standing for." The next morning, the Ledger published the article under a headline that stretched across 2 columns: Ranch Wife or Rebel One Woman's Stand Against Frontier Exploitation. It told Eliza's story in her own words. No embellishments, no dramatics, just the truth. How she had been sold into a marriage under coercion, how she'd escaped, how the tribal courts had upheld her right to choose her path. But it was the closing quote that struck a chord through the region. I am not a secret. I am not a shame. I am a woman, and I am home. The valley stirred like waking soil. Old-timers at the Riverton Saloon raised their cups in quiet toasts. Women who had once whispered behind closed shutters now wrote letters of support. Ruth Miller started organizing a gathering, not a protest, she told folks. A witness, a showing of faces who ain't afraid of hers. But the response wasn't all warm. That same evening, smoke rose from the eastern edge of the ranch's pasture. Daniel and Toma raced out to find a section of fencing torched, and near the charred wood a crude sign jammed into the snow. Wives don't get votes, nor voices. Eliza saw it as they dragged it back, her stomach twisting. Not because of what it said, but because she knew it would escalate. She helped rebuild the fence by lantern light. Daniel watched her hammer his brow tight. We could still leave, he said quietly. Pack up, start fresh where they don't know our names. I tried that, she replied, but they'll follow me as long as I let fear guide my steps. I'm done retreating. At sunrise, she rode alone into Riverton coat, drawn tight hair braided with resolve. The townspeople had gathered not in protest, but in uneasy anticipation. She tethered her horse near the square where the territorial officers had set up their inquiry desk. Their presence felt like a chill that wouldn't melt, dressed in polished badges and cold stares. The lead man, a Colonel Bates, adjusted his spectacles and looked up from a stack of affidavits. Mrs. Talbot, do you care to explain this? Campaign of yours, I'm not campaigning, Eliza answered, standing tall before the crowd. I'm telling the truth. Another officer snorted. You seem to think your truth matters more than the law. My truth isn't above the law, she said. It's what the law forgot. A quiet fell over the crowd. Someone stepped forward, Nash the blacksmith, and said, I watched this woman take in 2 orphans when no one else would. You come asking about contracts, but she's the one keeping her word every day. Then Ruth Miller. She makes the kind of home this town needs more of. And I'm a widow who knows the weight of paper versus a person. Even Toma stepped out from the crowd. Eliza Talbot's not the one you should be questioning, but she's the only one honest enough to answer. The officers bristled, but they couldn't ignore the shift in the air. The town, once passive, had taken a side. Bates sighed. This is highly irregular. Eliza looked him square in the eye. So was being sold. No charges were brought that day. The officers retreated with promises to review records. But their backs were straighter with discomfort. That night, Eliza stood with Daniel on the front porch. The wind carried smoke from someone's chimney down in the valley, but the sky was clear and sharp with stars. "You think it's over?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I think they finally see me." The fire they tried to silence had only spread, and Eliza knew it would keep burning not out of rage, but out of the fierce light of truth finally uncovered. The hardest forgiveness is the kind you give without apology. But I wasn't doing it for them, I was doing it to be free. The wind ran fierce that morning, dry and biting, as if the earth itself was warning of unfinished reckonings. Eliza stood on the ridge above the pasture arms, wrapped around herself, watching the sky fade from slate to pale rose. Below her, Daniel was feeding the horses. Nettie's laughter echoed faintly from the barn as she played with Rusty the dog she'd taken to sleeping beside every night. But inside Eliza's chest, peace felt like a distant promise. She hadn't told anyone about the second letter. It came 2 days after the article. This time the words were uglier, the handwriting rushed. "You brought shame to every decent woman who did her duty. You'll burn in the same hell your mother did." There was no signature. But the return address was clear: Braden Sutter, Shoshone Township. Braden, her half-brother. She hadn't seen his face since their father's funeral, a man who'd once swatted her hand away from the breadbasket and told her silence was a woman's greatest virtue. He'd sold her future with the same ease he'd traded horses, calm, dismissive, and sure it was his right. Eliza still remembered how his eyes gleamed when he handed her over to the Talbots. "You'll live better than you ever would with us. Be grateful." That was his benediction. Daniel noticed her silence that morning and didn't push. He'd learned that Eliza had a way of letting truth rise in her own time like bread dough in the dark. But when Toma arrived, his coat dusted with frost and his face grim, she knew the time had come. "There's talk in Shoshone," Toma said. "Your brother's been telling folks he'll ride here and drag you to the judge himself." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Over my dead body, no," Eliza said quietly, voice steady. "Over mine." They all stared at her. "I'm going to Shoshone." "Alone," Daniel stepped forward. "You are not. I have to," she said, locking eyes with him. "This has followed me long enough. I won't keep running. I need to face him. Not for revenge, for closure." It took hours to convince them, but in the end, Daniel handed her the reins to Juniper, his calmest mare, and packed a pistol in her saddlebag. "Don't use it unless you need to," he said. "I'm hoping I won't." She rode out before dawn, wrapped in her thick wool cloak, hair tied low under her hat. The ride to Shoshone was 3 hours in winter weather, but the roads were clear. The sun had fully risen when she saw the sign for the township. It looked smaller than she remembered, more faded, more tired. She tied Juniper near the church and walked the muddy lane to Braden's place. The house hadn't changed. Same chipped blue shutters. Same porch with the broken step. She hesitated before knocking, unsure what she expected. He opened the door in a worn flannel shirt and trousers held up by suspenders. His face was older now, creased, but the eyes were just as cold. He squinted at her. "Eliza, Braden. I figured you'd come slinking back." "I didn't come to slink," she replied. "I came to end this." He gave a snort and turned his back. "You already ended it the moment you humiliated us in print." She stepped inside. The air smelled like tobacco and dust. "You humiliated yourselves when you sold me like a mule." "You think that wasn't mercy," he snapped. We fed you. We kept you from the poorhouse. You think you were owed more, I was owed a choice. Braden's mouth twisted. Women like you always think you're special, just because you got lucky and found some rancher to pity you. She didn't flinch. Daniel didn't pity me. He respected me. That's what you'll never understand. He slammed his hand on the table. You're a disgrace to Ma's memory. Her voice was quiet but firm. Ma cried every night after Pa died. She wore her sorrow like a second skin. And you don't speak of her like you knew her. I knew she was afraid of what you were becoming. You were cruel to her too. The silence stretched. Finally, Braden slumped into the chair, rubbing his face. It was hard. Feeding us all. I did what I thought was right. No, she said gently. You did what was easy. He didn't answer, just stared at the floor. I'm not here to fight you, Braden. I'm here to say I forgive you. His head snapped up. She nodded slowly. Not because you asked. Not because you deserve it. But because I need to let it go. He blinked, disoriented. You're serious, I am. I hope someday you'll understand. But whether you do or not, it ends with me. She turned, walked back out into the sun. The wind caught the edge of her cloak and whipped it like a flag behind her. She didn't look back. By the time she reached the ranch again, the sun was dipping low and the whole sky blushed with the same soft color as the shawl her mother once wrapped around her shoulders in the cold. Daniel met her by the gate, brow furrowed with worry. Well, I saw him, she said. I said what needed saying. You all right, Eliza let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Yeah. For the first time in a long while? I think I am. Inside, Nettie had drawn a picture Eliza on a horse holding a banner that read, Truth. She'd spelled it truth, but the meaning was clear. Eliza hung it above the mantel, because freedom, she realized, didn't come when others set you loose. It came when you stopped carrying the chains they left behind. Grief never truly leaves. It just learns to sit beside you without making everything else disappear. The winter dusk was falling gently when Eliza stepped out onto the porch, a quilt draped around her shoulders. Snow clung to the fence rails in soft curves, and smoke from the chimney curled into the sky like a ribbon of memory. The ranch lay quiet, but inside her chest a storm was brewing. She had dreamed of her mother again. Not the quiet, blurred image that usually haunted her sleep, but sharp this time. Her mother had stood by the stove humming that low tune only Eliza ever seemed to remember. Her hands had been folded, her expression unreadable. But when Eliza reached out, she whispered, You made it farther than I ever could. Then she vanished into a swirl of wind and snow. Eliza blinked back tears. The dream had left something unsettled in her chest. Grief, yes, but also a strange hope. Behind her, the door creaked open. Daniel stepped out, his hand brushing hers. You've been quiet since Shoshone. She nodded. It stirred things up I thought were settled. He didn't press. He never did. Instead, he sat beside her on the porch bench, their knees touching lightly. You ever feel like healing makes you lonelier before it makes you whole? She asked after a long silence. All the time, he said, voice low. It's like tearing off a scab. Hurts like hell, but it's the only way it can close for good. The barn lantern flickered in the distance. Inside, Toma and Caroline were helping Nettie paint old crates for firewood storage. Nettie had taken to Caroline like a baby chick to a hen, quietly, fiercely. You think they'll stay? Eliza asked. Daniel leaned back against the post. Toma said something about putting roots down. Can't think of better soil than this. Eliza smiled faintly. Caroline told me the same thing yesterday. She said this place feels like a second chance. Daniel glanced over. What does it feel like to you? She hesitated. Like the life I didn't know I was allowed to want. The wind picked up slightly, brushing across her cheek with a whisper of frost. Inside, the kitchen lamp lit the windows with gold. Eliza rose, shaking off the chill. Come on. Let's not let the soup burn. They returned to warmth and light, and the scent of sage and onion filled the house. Nettie had painted one of the crates, a lopsided red with yellow stars. Caroline held it up like it was fine china. After dinner, when the house had quieted and the others had gone to bed, Eliza sat by the hearth with her journal. The fire popped, casting shifting shadows against the walls. She wrote, "Sometimes the things that broke us never apologize. Sometimes they never even know. But we heal anyway, not because they deserve it, but because we do." She paused, tapping her pen against the page. Ma would have liked it here. The knock at the door startled her. It was past 10, and the wind had picked up outside. Daniel came down the stairs, pulling on his coat. "Stay back," he whispered. "Could be a trap." Eliza stood silently near the hearth, heart pounding. Daniel opened the door. A man stood there, hunched against the cold, his hat in hand. His coat was worn boots, caked with frozen mud. He looked past Daniel and locked eyes with Eliza. "You're Eliza Red Elk?" he asked. She stepped forward. "Yes." He cleared his throat. "Name's Dr. Harlan. I was your mother's physician, back then, in Laramie." Eliza's breath caught. "I read the article," he said, gaze gentle but firm. "It stirred things up, including some old records I never had the heart to destroy." Daniel looked between them. "You'd better come in." Inside, the man removed his gloves, slowly revealing hands spotted with age and weather. He looked around as if anchoring himself. "I'm not here to dredge up pain," he began, "but I thought you had a right to know your mother left something with me." Eliza couldn't speak. She only nodded. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn envelope sealed with a faded wax stamp. He held it out with reverence. "She wrote this a month before she died. Told me if anyone ever asked anyone who truly wanted to know, I should give it to them." Eliza took it with shaking fingers. The parchment was delicate, stained in one corner. "I don't know what it says," the doctor said. "Never opened it," Eliza whispered. "Thank you." He nodded and rose. "I'll see myself out. My debt to her was never paid. Maybe this is a small piece of it." After he left, Daniel closed the door gently. "Do you want to be alone?" "No," she said. "Stay." They sat in silence. Then, with trembling hands, Eliza broke the wax seal. "My dearest Eliza, if you are reading this, then somehow some part of our story survived. That alone gives me peace. I write this not to explain away my failures, but to give you something I never gave myself permission to speak the truth. You were born into a world where silence was armor. I wore mine too long. When I saw what Braden became, when I saw what they were doing to you, I was afraid. Afraid if I spoke, I'd lose what little roof we had over our heads. I chose survival over protection. I regret that every day. But Eliza, you were light even in the dark. I see now if I had given you even one seed of freedom, you would have made it bloom. You were meant for more than our house of ghosts. I pray you find kindness. I pray you forgive not because they deserve it, but because your soul deserves peace. Live full. Live loud. You were born to break the chain. All my love." Ma Eliza let the letter fall into her lap. Her tears came hot, silent. Daniel took her hand, threading their fingers together. "She loved you," he said softly. "She was trapped, but she still tried. He nodded. So did you. Outside the wind howled, but inside the silence was soft. That night Eliza placed the letter on the mantel beside Nettie's drawing. In the morning, she would ride to the ridge and bury it beneath the cottonwood tree. Not as a goodbye, but as a seed, like her mother said. A seed of something new. Home wasn't just a place. It was a choice we kept making through storms and silence in the arms that stayed when others left. The air was crisp with the promise of a coming thaw, even as snow still clung in the corners of the pastures. Eliza stood beside the cottonwood ridge, the letter now resting deep beneath the earth, sealed in a tin box and marked by a single river stone. She hadn't spoken a word during the ride up with Daniel, but he didn't press. His presence was steady like the land beneath her boots. When she finally turned from the mound, her shoulders were squared and her breath even. The wind caught strands of her hair, lifting them like ribboned prayers to the sky. "You all right?" he asked. "I think I am," she said, voice clear. "I've buried what needed to rest. Now I want to start living what comes next." They rode down in silence until the ranch appeared again, familiar and golden in the morning light. Smoke rose from the chimney, and laughter rang faint from the barn where Nettie and Toma were chasing a chicken that had outwitted the coop. By the time Eliza stepped into the kitchen, the kettle was whistling, and Caroline was at the table mending a saddle strap. "You ride up to the ridge?" Caroline asked without looking up. Eliza nodded, left her letter under the cottonwood. Caroline smiled gently. "Good place. That tree's seen more prayers than the church pew." As they settled into breakfast, Eliza watched the light play across the room. It was simple. It was real. It was hers. Daniel walked in after brushing snow from his coat and sat beside her. For a moment they shared a glance that said more than 100 conversations. "I think it's time," Eliza said, breaking the quiet. "For what?" Daniel asked. "For planting." He arched a brow. "Snow's not quite out yet." "I don't mean crops," she said, smile soft. "I mean roots." That afternoon, with Toma dragging fence wire and Nettie proudly holding a stack of seed packets, the five of them knelt together and began laying out the spring garden. Tomatoes, squash, beans. Toma wanted corn. Nettie insisted on sunflowers. They worked until the sun hung low and their hands were streaked with mud and hope. Later, Eliza stood washing her hands at the pump when Daniel joined her. His sleeves rolled his shirt speckled with dust. "You meant what you said earlier?" he asked. "I did. I want to stay. I want to build." Daniel's eyes met hers, steady and full of something he no longer bothered hiding. "Eliza," he said quietly, "we started this whole thing with one night, one fire, and a shared plate. I didn't know then what would come of it. But I know now." She stilled water dripping from her fingertips. "I'm not asking for anything rushed," he continued. "But if this is home for you truly, I'd be honored to make it a home with you. All of it. The hard days. The healing. You." Tears welled unbidden. "You're not a man of many words, Daniel Red Elk. No, but I mean every damn one I say." She stepped forward close enough that the scent of cedar on his coat filled her nose. "Then yes," she whispered. "Let's build something worth staying for." The kiss was quiet. It didn't need fire. It had the steadiness of riverstone. That night around the hearth, Carolyn told stories of her mother's wild cooking misadventures in Arizona. Toma shared a poem he'd been writing for Nettie's birthday. Nettie begged for Eliza to read from the new book Daniel had bought, one about a girl and her horse who saved a town. They were a strange collection of hearts, but they beat in rhythm now. When the lanterns dimmed and the fire ebbed to coals, Eliza stepped out to the porch alone. The moon lit the land with silver serenity. She thought of her mother, of the long road that had led her here, of the alley where she'd nearly died, of the man who said you're coming home. And now finally she had. The door creaked behind her. Caroline stepped out, arms folded. "You're not going to start brooding like Daniel, are you?" she teased. Eliza laughed, maybe a little. Caroline studied her. "You know I watched you when you came, thin as bone and twice as guarded. I thought that girl's got a storm inside her. But now I see land after the storm." Eliza looked out at the horizon. "So do I." The wind shifted warm and carrying the scent of coming spring. "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" Caroline asked. Eliza nodded. "More than all right." From inside, Daniel's voice called softly, "You two planning to sleep out there?" They smiled. "Nah," Eliza said. "We're coming home." The educational lesson learned from this story is that healing doesn't always come in grand gestures. It often arrives quietly through the steady hands of those who choose to stay. Even after deep hurt or loss, it's possible to rebuild a life when trust is nurtured and kindness is given a place to grow. We are never too old or too broken to begin again, especially when surrounded by people who see us not for what we've lost, but for what we still carry inside. Home in the end is not just a place, it's the hearts that welcome us back.